Today we're going to go over section 2.4 of our BJU Press Algebra 2 textbook. We're going to be covering distances on number lines. So let's take a look at this absolute value equation. 2x plus 3 is equal to negative 7. Using our methods from 2.3, we could apply our definition and we would get this. 2x plus 3 equals negative 7, or 2x plus 3 is equal to 7. When we solve both sides of the equations, we get x is equal to negative 5, or x is equal to 2. When we check our answers, we see that 2 times negative 5 plus 3 is not equal to negative 7. 2 times negative 5 is negative 10. Negative 10 plus 3 is negative 7. But the absolute value of negative 7 is positive 7. It's not negative 7. Okay? So it does not match this. Okay? So we have a problem. Alright? It doesn't work. So we're like, okay, well maybe the other one will work. Let's let x be equal to 2. So 2 times 2 plus 3 is supposed to be equal to 7. Okay? Actually, it's supposed to be equal to negative 7 because we're doing that absolute value now. Okay. So 2 times 2 is 4. And then 4 plus 3 is 7. And the absolute value of 7 is 7, not negative 7. So that's an issue. Again, it didn't work. Okay? So either solution that we came up with worked. So in both cases, we got a false statement. That means both answers are extraneous, and that means there are no solution to the original equation. Okay? So using the distance concept of absolute value, we could think of it like this. We have an absolute value of something is equal to a negative number. Well, distance can never be negative. And if distance cannot be negative, there's no solutions, right? So let's call this example 1. We want to solve 2x plus 3 equals negative 7. We will say no solution. Distance cannot be negative. All right. So we are going to talk about some distance calculations and how to calculate distances. But before we do that, I need to review with you the midpoint formula. Okay, you have to be able to find a midpoint of two numbers on a number line. So a midpoint is an average of two coordinates. It's the middle, right? So it's an average. Remember, to find an average, if there are two things, you divide by 2. So if we want the midpoint formula, for number lines, we would say this. If M is the midpoint of the segment joining A and B, where A and B are both points, right? So M is the midpoint of the segment that joins points A and point B, then M is equal to A plus B divided by 2. Okay? So let's see this midpoint formula in action. We are going to do an example where we have to find a midpoint. We want to find midpoint of the segment joining -3 and 11. All right, so we're going to use our formula. So m is equal to a plus b divided by 2. So we plug in our a and our b. -3 plus 11 over 2. -3 plus 11 is 8. So we have 8 over 2. So we get 4. Okay. So if we were to check this on the number line, we are saying that 4 is exactly halfway between -3 and 11. Okay, so that's something that we can check, right? We can draw a number line. Here's -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, right? And let's find the midpoint, right? So I'm going to go by threes for a couple of, so 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Let's do another 3. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so here we are. All right, we're about halfway. Here is our halfway point right here. And that point is 1, 2, 3, 4. So yes, it is the coordinate of 4. All right, so it checks, right? Midpoint formula is legit. We can definitely use it to find a midpoint of 2 coordinates, okay? Let's say we wanted to find the distance between -2 and 5. Now, we could very easily draw a number line and find the distance between -2 and 5, right? And we would count. We start at -2, we use our little hopping frog, and we go all the way to 5, and we say, oh, that's 7 units, okay? Another method involves the subtraction of the coordinates, right? We know we have 5 and we have -2, so between 0 and 5 is 5, between 0 and -2 is 2, so we have 7, okay? However, if we subtract in the other order, we get a negative distance. If we do -2 minus 5, we get -7. And distances always have to be positive, so you have to reject that answer of -7. So if you have a distance between 2 points, you need to make sure that you always have a positive answer, okay? So let's talk about, we talked about doing the number line, and that seemed pretty okay. But when we get into really big numbers, we're not going to want to be able to use a number line all of the time. So there is an actual formula that will help us find distance on number lines. So we're looking at distance formula for number lines. Okay, so if D is the distance between points with coordinates A and B, then D is equal to the absolute value of the difference between A and B. And it doesn't matter what order, you can put B minus A as long as you're doing the absolute value. So remember how when we did the -2 and the 7, both answers were 7 because even though you did negative 2 minus 5 and got negative 7, distance could never, ever be negative. So we always want the absolute value. So again, it's okay to do it in different orders as long as you are taking the absolute values. So let's do a couple of examples so you can see this in action. Let's do find the distance between points with coordinates -3 and 11. Okay, so I'm going to show you both ways, A minus B and B minus A, just so that way you can see that it doesn't matter what order as long as you're taking absolute value. So D is equal to A minus B, which is -3 minus 11, absolute value. -3 minus 11 is -14. The absolute value of -14 is 14. So let's do absolute value of B minus A so you can see it both ways. So that would be 11 minus -3. 11 minus -3 is 14. And then the absolute value of 14 is 14. So it does work both ways. Alright, so now let's talk about, well, can we write an absolute value equation if we're given just a graph? Can we figure out what the absolute value equation is? The answer is yes, okay? So the things that you want to remember to do is you want to find the midpoint. Then you want to find the distance from either end to the midpoint. And then lastly, you want to find the distance from the original point X to the midpoint. So let me show you an example of how that works out. We want to write an absolute value equation and this is the graph that they give us. So we have a coordinate at -1 and we have a coordinate of 3. Okay? So first things first, find the midpoint, right? So midpoint is equal to A plus B divided by 2. So -1 plus 3 divided by 2. So 2 over 2, which is equal to 1. So our midpoint is 1, right? Here's our midpoint. All right? Now that we have that, we need to find the distance from either point to the midpoint, okay? So let's use 3, okay? That's because I like positive numbers. So let's use 3 for our endpoint. So remember, distance is equal to A minus B, absolute value. So we're going to do 3 minus our midpoint, which was 1. 3 minus 1 is 2, and the absolute value of 2 is 2, okay? So that's the distance between our midpoint and one of our endpoints, okay? So now we want to write the distance from the original point X to the midpoint 1. Okay? So, again, we are writing the distance, which is absolute value, from the original point X to the midpoint 1 is 2. Okay? So remember, distance is equal to A minus B. A is our original point X. 1 is our B value, right? Okay, so we want the distance between the original point X and the midpoint, which was 1. So distance is A minus B, so we're going to do X minus 1. And that distance is equal to 2, because we said that the distance between an endpoint and the midpoint was 2. So we get this formula right here. The absolute value of X minus 1 equals 2. Alright, so let's try something different. Let's do example 5. Okay, where it says, if the point X is 5 units away from a point with coordinate of 3, find all possible values of X. Alright, so first thing we want to do is we want to paraphrase so that we have a distance formula, okay? So the distance, what this is saying is that the distance from X to 3 is 5, right? The distance from X to 3 is 5. So the distance from X to 3 means equals 5, right? So the distance from X to 3 is 5. Well, we know our distance formula, so this is where we translate. Distance formula is the absolute value of A minus B. We know the is part, so we know that this is 5, and that we know that this first thing is X, and we know that that second thing is 3. So here we go. Now, the last thing we need to do is we need to solve, right? It's already isolated, so that means that X minus 3 is equal to 5, or X minus 3 is equal to negative 5, which means X is equal to 8, or X is equal to negative 2. Alright, so that is all that I have. When in doubt, look back at your distance formula and just write the distance formula. You see how I did that right here? I just wrote my distance formula, okay? Look for is something. That's always going to be your equals D. Whenever you have is a number, that's always D equals, okay? And then apply the definition of distance, A minus B, right? A minus B. So usually X is your A, and that distance from something is the B, right? So that's an easy way to try to figure out what you're supposed to be writing. All right, go ahead and attempt the problems.